So I thought we'd just jump right in because I've been waiting to hear your reaction to a couple of reports now about the Queen being rumored to retire in 18 months, basically when she turns 95. And I know you don't put a lot of stock in this, do you?
I don't buy it. I don't think it'll happen for a few reasons. Queen Elizabeth is a woman of her word, right? She doesn't contradict herself ever.
And so remind us about the promise she made.
Right. So on her 21st birthday, which was way back in 1947, she made a speech while she was on tour of South Africa, and she dedicated her life to the Commonwealth. So she was not queen yet. She was still a princess. But she said in part, "I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong." And so she's never going to abdicate. Number one, because she made that promise. Number two, remember everything that happened with her uncle Edward? Her father became king. She became queen because her uncle abdicated. And they had so much animosity toward him because the whole family felt like becoming king killed her dad because it's so much stress. It's one of those positions that, like, if you hear any of them talk about, nobody wants to do it. It's the weight of the world on your shoulders. You are one of the most powerful people in the world. And it's not for 4 years or 8 years. It is for the rest of your life. And I think she doesn't want to put that on her son before she has to. I can't see her abdicating. However, there's this thing called the Regency Act of 1937, which means if the monarch becomes ill or can't perform their duties, whether it's permanent or temporary, the next person in line who meets all of these qualifications, they become the regent, which means they fulfill the daily duties of the monarch. So the next person in line would be Prince Charles, which means he would become Prince Regent, and he would fulfill all of Queen Elizabeth's daily duties, doing the boxes, meeting with the Prime Minister on a weekly basis, all of those things that she does, but he wouldn't actually be the king. We both read this book called Charles at 70 by Robert Jobson, and in it he talks about how Prince Charles is already kind of doing this. He's been traveling on behalf of the Queen abroad because she stopped doing that a few years ago. And he's meeting with world leaders. When he visits these countries, they're considered state visits. He's there in her place. So I don't think it would be a stretch to think that that could happen. But I don't think she'll actually officially retire. I think she's going to be queen until she dies. But Prince Charles may start picking up more of her responsibilities.
Well, here's what gets me more interested in this rumor is that this whole thing with Andrew, I think, has taken a toll on her.
Oh,
and absolutely. I think she realizes with her age, I think it's hard to be aware of all the implications this can have. Because let's face it, for older people, like the internet and social media and things going viral, I think it's more hard for them to conceive just because they didn't grow up with that. They've never had to grapple with that. You know, what I see here is Charles already taking over a lot of the big decision making, hence why we saw Prince Andrew riding horses with the Queen one day, because that's how she wants to interact with her son, not punishing him for whatever these misdeeds were. You know, I also think she must look at Prince Philip, who's 98, and think, look at how much he's slowed down. I mean, that's sort of where she's headed. Mm-hmm. So you're right. Would she really abdicate? Probably not. But I think just more and more it's going to appear Charles is in charge. And as we'll talk about in a couple minutes about Andrew, he's already spearheading the crisis management, the family management of that, every little detail, it seems.
I think that's a great example of him kind of stepping into the role of what Queen Elizabeth would have been doing completely on her own 10 years ago. Yeah, he appears to be heavily involved in the decision for Andrew to step back from royal duties. And you know, we read a few things about Prince William, Charles bringing Prince William into the fold, too, right, to try to help him learn and understand how all this works and how decisions are made. And I mean, I think it's a great learning opportunity for both of them. But I think that's a huge indication that the Queen realizes she can't do all of this on her own.
Right.
For much longer.
Right. And so I'll just go on record. I love the Queen. I hope she's in good health.
Me too.
But I mean, when you're 93, there's stuff going on health-wise with you. Buckingham Palace does an excellent job of managing and keeping all that information very quiet. But I just kind of out of concern for her, I hope she's not pushing herself too much. Can you imagine how exhausted you must be?
I mean, even if she's in excellent physical health, that's rough. That would be rough on you or me.
I agree.
And I can't imagine working at that level when you're 93 years old.
I agree. Remember, was it 2 winters ago she had the really bad cold?
Oh, yes.
Or was it longer than that?
It was probably about 2 years ago. Didn't she miss Christmas?
Correct.
Church
services. Yeah, she goes to 2 usually on Christmas Day. She didn't go to any. So we knew about that because it's such a public thing. I hope she's watching out for herself, that she's not like sacrificing so much that she feels bad all the time or doesn't physically feel well because she's pushing herself.
Okay, so as we were getting ready for this week's episode, we saw that Prince Charles's People released a statement to People magazine about all of the rumors about his mom retiring at 95. And the spokesperson said there are no plans for any change in arrangements at the age of 95 or any other age. So what did you think about that?
Well, I felt again like they were pressured into having to say something.
Yeah.
I think it was just so out there. They had to say something. You can't just let it go. Something so big.
We've talked about in the past how rare it is for them to make a statement refuting rumors. And so I feel like the threshold the bar has been lowered a little bit, like just this year, because we've heard them refute much more benign rumors, and we were kind of confused as to why they were taking the time to do that. But I think you're right. Like, they had to say something this time. And I thought it was really interesting that this came from a spokesperson for Prince Charles and not Buckingham Palace.
That is really interesting. And I wonder if they feel like a lot of pressure because of Prince Andrew thing and, what's gone on with the Sussexes. And, there's just been a lot of negative, I don't know if you want to call it negative, but, turmoil.
Yeah.
And this is one thing they want to just put the fire out right away. There's nothing to this.
Yeah, I bet they feel, especially with the Prince Andrew stuff, that maybe their position, their role in society is maybe not in jeopardy, but a little unstable. And so rumors that the Queen might retire just kind of exacerbates that. And so I think it makes sense for them to come out and say, put an end to it.
So Monday, December 2nd, Virginia Giuffre, who is a woman who was 17 when she said she was trafficked to Prince Andrew 3 times by Andrew's friend Jeffrey Epstein. She did her own BBC interview and talked at length and in a lot of detail, and I thought she was very sympathetic about sex abuse at the hands of Andrew. And what did you think of the interview? We only saw clips.
We only saw clips. We haven't been able to watch the whole thing, but I found her very believable. It was hard to watch. Just the clips that I saw, I felt really terrible for her.
I did too. It was hard to watch, and not just believable, but the pain is still very raw for her, even all these years later. And I was really struck by that appeal she made to people in the UK of like, please be on my side about this. Don't tell me that this is something up for debate just because it was a powerful person involved. I felt it really was damaging, again, to Prince Andrew.
Oh, yeah. And she talked about how the night that they were at Tramp nightclub, how they were dancing, and then she described how much she was sweating and was like talking about how he was just like raining in sweat, which is something that Prince Andrew says he couldn't sweat at the time. So it's this very interesting thing where he says, I can't sweat at all, but she's describing how he was just like drenched in sweat. It seemed like she was reliving that night as she was talking about it. She was very descriptive of what it was like and how she felt during it, and talked about how he was a hideous dancer.
Right. There was so much detail there.
Right.
That it would have been hard to make that up. And that's exactly what I thought. She was describing as if she was in that moment what had happened.
Right.
In the days since then, there's just been a lot more of this crisis management on behalf of the royal family. Like we said, Charles, furious, in crisis mode. Vanity Fair said that Prince Charles was supposed to have this big face-to-face meeting with Prince Andrew before Virginia's interview came out. I haven't really seen any details about what was discussed there, but if it's a meeting between Prince Charles and Prince Andrew, you have to have a pretty big inside source to get anything out of that. My interpretation of this is Charles realizes what a huge disaster this is.
I think so too. And remember, a lot of people were comparing Prince Andrew's interview to the interviews that Charles and Diana gave when they separated. And I don't know if he regrets it, but I think he understands what an impact that had on, how he was viewed, how his family was viewed. And I think he knows that these things never go well.
Right. Well, and now he's sort of on the record as having denied all this happened, which prompted Prince Charles to come out and say he wants his brother to be upfront, open, and honest, and tell him if there's anything else he thinks could come out. So when your own brother doesn't believe you, wow, that's a full-blown crisis, Brandie.
And the BBC said that in response to the Panorama interview, Buckingham Palace released a statement that said Andrew unequivocally regrets his ill-judged association with Jeffrey Epstein and deeply sympathizes with those affected who want some form of closure, which is a nice statement, but it kind of contradicts what Andrew said himself at the end of the Newsnight interview when the interviewer asked, do you regret your relationship with Jeffrey Epstein? And he said no, because of the connections he made.
I can't believe a lawyer would let him do that interview.
I'm not sure they had any lawyers involved in the decision-making.
You're probably right. You know what? You're probably right. Wow, that is a horrible situation. I really feel for Virginia. It's been hard for me to gauge in the couple of days since the interview what the sort of public sentiment is for her. Have you been able to kind of tell? I haven't really...
I haven't heard nearly as much about this interview as we heard about the Prince Andrew interview.
Yes.
Now, she's spoken about her story before, and Andrew speaking to Newsnight was kind of a new thing, so I can see how that was talked about more. But no, you're right. I haven't heard a whole lot of people reacting to what happened, what she said.
And her interview was originally supposed to be a 30-minute program, and it ended up being a full hour. And maybe that's just something that's going to have to play out more over time of what people think of her.
And I think a lot of it, she's an American, and so Americans are very interested in this story, and we haven't been able to watch it yet. So I think that also has a big impact on public reaction when you haven't been able to watch the entire thing with all of the context.
Right. So the fallout for Andrew, rightfully so, has been really severe. The Royal Standard flag apparently removed from Royal Lodge.
His has flown above Royal Lodge while he's in residence for years. And, stepping back from royal duties, I would imagine someone told him to remove it. I don't think that's a decision you make on your own. And I think the most interesting thing about it is that the Daily Mail reported that the flagpole was missing as well. So it's hard.
It's not a temporary thing. That flag is down.
Right. It's not temporary.
Right.
I was kind of surprised they didn't fly the Union Jack in its place. So I think the absence of a flag is really telling of probably how the family feels about him right now. The New York Post says that top military leaders want Prince Andrew to be stripped of his honorary positions in the Royal Army and Navy because he's an embarrassment, and that his reluctance to cooperate with U.S. authorities is against military values.
Brandie, that's pretty severe.
So if you remember in one of his statements, he said that if required, he would cooperate with U.S. authorities, but he wasn't volunteering to speak to them. So I think that's where the part about the reluctance to cooperate comes into play. I don't know who has the final say as to whether he keeps those, if it's his mom or if it's military leaders or who does that. But I think the next few months, we're going to see this story continue to develop with smaller things like this.
Right. Which isn't such a small thing.
Right.
That's a big deal.
That's a big deal.
Yeah. And equally as telling, did you see this piece about the Queen canceling his 60th birthday party? So there was going to be this big celebration. It's a big milestone birthday for Prince Andrew. His birthday's February 19th. But the Queen is now saying, no big party. We're just going to have like a small, intimate family dinner.
Yeah.
Wow.
Good for her. I can't imagine what kind of reaction the public would give if they had this big celebration to honor his 60th birthday in the midst of this, crisis.
Well, and then the other fallout for his daughters, and especially with the royal wedding coming up, that's going to affect what happens for that
absolutely.
wedding.
And we still haven't heard of a wedding date for Beatrice and her fiancé, Edo. And traditionally, when they announce their engagement, the date is set within about 6 months of the announcement. That happened with Will and Kate and her sister. And so they announced their engagement back, I guess, was it the end of September, around there, early October? And there's still no publicly disclosed wedding date. Maybe they're just going to take their time and hope that this whole thing with her father dies down before they set a date. I guess we'll see what happens with her wedding.
Can you imagine planning a wedding among all this going on?
That's going to be rough.
Very rough. Which makes this next little tidbit, you know how we used to think the big travel debacle for the royal family taking all these private jets was a big deal? The Prince Andrew thing makes that look just so small.
Right.
But the Queen, I think she's taking a really good approach to this. She's announced she's actually hiring someone to be in charge of royal travel, and it's a job that actually pays pretty well. There's a LinkedIn posting, Brandie. And again, why do I have you in mind for this?
I have none of these qualifications.
Okay, this one might be, you're still personal secretary material, though. Definitely. But it's a job that pays £85,000 a year. That's about 109,000 American dollars. And for 37 and a half hours of work per week, you'll be doing things like purchasing safe, efficient, cost-effective, and appropriate travel services for official duties of members of the royal family and their households. And this is all going back to the summer when, remember, there was such a to-do about members of the royal family flying all around and their carbon footprint with all the air travel and why they were coming out as such big conservation supporters, but then flying all these multiple flights everywhere. So I think this is really a good idea.
I think it's a great idea. Now, this is for official duties. So a lot of those private jet flights, though, were vacations and private trips that they were taking. So I wonder if this person, though, will still have influence on their private lives. Maybe not officially, but still kind of weighing in and giving them guidance about what they should be doing and what they maybe shouldn't be doing?
Well, I think there's a definite trickle-down effect here, because if you have someone who's coordinating, the message I got from this is we're going to be flying commercial a whole lot more.
Yes.
Okay?
Yeah.
And so we need somebody to coordinate that now.
Yes.
Oh, great idea. I'm sure that person's going to be able to say, this is the protocol for when you fly commercial, whether it's for royal duties or privately, which then makes it a whole lot easier to fly or arrange your private travel, because now there's actually somebody with a book about how to do it.
Right. And it says you also need good negotiating skills. So it sounds like they're going to be working with the airlines and trying to like haggle for the best price.
Well, and not only that, remember when Will and Kate traveled with the kids on a commercial flight?
Yeah.
And everybody sitting on the plane saw them get off first?
Yes.
I mean, I'm sure those are probably the things you're negotiating
Right,
for.
right. That makes sense too. And it was so funny because there were people who were on that flight who later said they had no idea
they were
on there, and it wasn't until they landed and then just happened to be looking out the window. Like, you know how you land and you wait a few minutes before getting off the airplane, and there goes the Cambridges.
Yeah. I think that just makes so much sense to me. And I can't believe they really didn't have someone officially coordinating this before.
Right. It sounds like a really important position. Yeah, you're right. And it says 37 and a half hours per week, which is, a full-time job in the United Kingdom. But this has to be an around-the-clock thing,
Absolutely. And I think you'd probably end up traveling with them.
Probably,
too.
Yeah.
Quite a bit.
When Will and Kate ran into that issue when they're traveling through Pakistan, and the flight had to circle back and unexpectedly, stayed the night, the city that they weren't supposed to be in, and then had to fly back the next morning. But it's things like that this person's going to be awakened in the middle of the night saying, hey, we have a problem. We need you to come in.
The flight didn't make it.
Right.
They're on standby. Yeah, or something. So aside from these great negotiating skills that you were talking about for good deals and all the little frills they're going to need, this person who takes the job is going to need experience in operations and financial management of travel and logistics, a good understanding of safety management systems, aviation safety auditing, quality assurance, leadership skills. Wow, it's a tall order.
That's a lot.
Good luck to whoever takes that job.
I'm sure there's somebody out there in the world who fits all of these qualifications. Right, yeah. But it's not either of us. Did you know that you can nominate someone to be knighted by the royal family?
I did not know this. Like, I can here in the U.S. be nominated? Really?
Yes. They don't have to live in the United Kingdom.
And the person nominating doesn't have to live in the United Kingdom. That's wild.
And the application is surprisingly short. I expected some really long thing, but it's online. You can check it out, and we'll post a link to it on our Twitter account, but it's pretty basic. It asks which honor you're suggesting the person for, their nationality, their birth date, occupation, and what they've done to make them worthy of a nomination. And then it also wants to know if they've ever been previously nominated or if they've received any other honors and your relationship to the person that you're nominating. So then there's this area where you can summarize why you're nominating them. And I found this really funny. The summary must be 4 lines or less and in a font no smaller than 10-point Arial. So
very specific.
Very specific. And I think they probably put these rules in place because people would try to cram in like all of these accomplishments and probably make the font really small, and you know, it ends up being like 4 paragraphs or something. So that's the summary. And then the next section, they ask you to write a detailed explanation of why they deserve the honor. But again, this can be no longer than 1 full page in 10-point Arial font. Because, I mean, can you imagine how many nominations they get? It's probably a lot of work to read all of these. They probably go through the summaries first, kind of separate the ones that are possible from, okay, we're definitely not going to waste our time on these. And then take that possibly, pile and read the actual, read the description. But they ask you to, quote, describe the impact and the difference that the candidate's contribution has made to a particular field, locality, or community, as well as detailing the challenges and difficulties faced and how they overcome them, including any difficult or dangerous environments.
Wow.
So if you know anybody who fits that description, you
know any heroes.
Right, yeah. If you know any heroes, you can nominate them to receive a knighthood. And there's all different, we've talked about them before, different
categories.
Levels. Different categories.
And levels, right, exactly.
Oh, and you need 2 letters of recommendation from people who are considered experts in that field.
Wow. So they really want to make sure that you are who you say you are.
Yeah, they want to make sure you're legit, but it's not a complicated process at all. And I was really surprised by that.
Me too. That's great. That's so interesting.
Yeah. So you follow Kensington Palace on Twitter, right?
Yes.
Who doesn't? Camilla Cabello is a singer who was recently at Kensington Palace for Radio 1's Teen Heroes celebration. And she was there with the BBC Radio 1 DJ named Greg James, who, side note, I don't think we ever talked about this on the podcast, but he made a comment back in September when Princess Charlotte started school and kind of made a joke about like what kind of school has the students walk up and give the headmaster a handshake. And Will and Kate were listening to the radio when he made that comment. And so when he came to the palace for this event, they actually talked to him about it. Yeah.
Good for them.
So I thought that was funny. Good. So anyway, this guy, so that gives you a little context of his personality. He dared Camila Cabello to steal a pencil when they were at Kensington Palace for this event, which sounds really stupid. But Camila went on his radio show and they were talking about this dare that he proposed to her. And she said, she asked him if he triple doggy dares her, and he said yes. And she said, and you can't not do a triple doggy dare. If there's anything I've learned in my life, it's that. So I did it. So she stole this pencil and I guess gave it to her mom for safekeeping. And when her mom found out about it, she was like, you have to give this back.
Right.
This is, this is not the kind of person I raised.
Right.
And she refused to because it was a dare. And so she's like talking about this on the radio show, and she apologized to both Will and Kate and said, she still has the pencil. I'm sorry, William. I'm sorry, Kate. The funniest part is they tweeted out this snippet of the video, and Kensington Palace replied on Twitter with just the eyeball emoji.
I love that. That is so funny. I wonder why she wanted to talk about this, because I feel like if you took the pencil kind of joking with Will and Kate, like, haha, I'm going to take, I'm stealing this as sort of, that's one thing. But to really just wholesale take something and then go on and admit it in public, does that seem weird to you?
It seems super weird. The only thing I can come up with is she thinks it's funny. They both think it's funny and a good story to tell. I mean, we're talking about it, so I guess it's somewhat entertaining, but it just seems really strange for 2 adults to do.
I agree. And I think that eyeball emoji, that kind of sums it up without scolding them or what are you going to say? It's just like a petty thing to do.
Yeah, I thought the choice of the emoji was interesting because it wasn't the laughing emoji where they think it's funny, it's a joke, but it's just kind of like the side eye.
Right.
Like what did you do?
You really did that? Yeah, I know. I didn't really know, still don't really know who that singer is. But now, I mean, you just don't have a good impression of her. I mean, is that what you want to be known for?
Right.
It's kind of weird. Yeah.
She was in that group Fifth Harmony, and she left a few years ago, but I think not on great terms.
I don't even know who you're talking about.
That's okay.
I'm sorry.
It was
I have
a
no
girl
idea
group.
who it is. Okay, good. Were they good?
I guess.
Okay, good.
I don't listen to them.
Now she'll forever be known as the pencil stealer.
Yes,
me.
the girl
Yeah.
who stole from
Yeah.
Kensington
Yeah.
Palace. Remember at the beginning of season 3 of The Crown where we saw Queen Elizabeth getting her new portrait for the stamp?
Yes.
New stamp.
Mhm.
So Buckingham Palace has almost acknowledged the scene in The Crown, which is something I don't think they've ever done before. They don't talk about The Crown specifically, but there's no way this is a coincidence where they just decided to start talking about the history of the stamp. They started tweeting a thread about the photographs that were used to create that stamp. And they talk about how the first set of pictures were taken in 1952 by Dorothy Wilding. And they say that 59 images of Queen Elizabeth were taken over 2 photo sessions. And the winning image was used on stamps between 1953 and 1971. So that's the image that we see of Claire Foy.
Mm-hmm.
And then they say that in 1967, the image switched to an effigy of Queen Elizabeth, which was created by Arnold Machen. And the palace says that it's widely considered to be the most reproduced and iconic images in the world, and it's been reprinted an estimated 220 billion times.
Wow.
In more than 130 different colors. So that's that iconic image of Queen Elizabeth facing the side, and you get the profile, and she's wearing the diamond diadem. And then the palace went on to say that the world's first stamp was the penny black and featured an effigy of the head of Queen Victoria as engraved by William Wyon. And the effigy was created by Wyon, who was the chief engraver at the Royal Mint to mark Queen Victoria's 1838 coronation. And then they had a picture of the stamps. And I had no idea that the world's first stamps were, number 1, of Queen Victoria, and number 2, in 1838. That seems really late.
Yes, it does.
I thought it had been around for a lot longer.
Yeah, it's really interesting history. And I guess we just take it for granted that these stamps are just there, but the history of how they came to be and the photos that were taken to make them, it's really great.
I love when the royal
Beautiful.
family tweets out threads of the history of anything.
Yeah, I agree. It's amazing how stamps can almost be their own form of artwork.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And there's so many different ones of Queen Elizabeth now, but that's the one that really, everyone thinks of when they think of a Queen Elizabeth
The
stamp.
iconic one.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So when you travel, what do you do
Yes.
with your dresses?
You know what I do? I do this Martha Stewart thing
Ooh,
where you take dry cleaning bags or the
Uh-huh.
plastic that your dry cleaning comes in.
yeah.
And if you don't want somebody to get wrinkled, and this works literally every time, you wrap the garment in the plastic bag. So if I have a dress, I'll tear the plastic bag so it's one big plastic sheet.
Okay.
I lay the dress down, on the plastic, fold it over, and I just keep folding till it fits in the suitcase.
Okay.
It's never wrinkled when I open it again.
That's
how
amazing.
it is amazing. It works for everything.
I feel like this is a tip that needs to be shared with the world.
Well, Martha, I got to give credit to Martha Stewart
Okay.
because that's where I first heard about it.
we need to spread it more widely. Then.
We do. Well, and so before a trip, I'll go
Yeah.
to the dry cleaners and say, can I get a couple extra plastic bags? And
is so
it works for
smart.
men's suits, like if you have to go to a funeral or something
Yeah.
and you wrap everything in plastic, it comes out like it wasn't even folded.
Wow.
Okay, so I fold everything and put it in a suitcase. That's my
That is
answer,
so
Brandie.
smart. I fold everything too, or roll it, and then I have to iron whenever I
Or
get to
steam.
where I'm going.
Right.
Yes, but Kate Middleton doesn't have to do that.
Of course she doesn't. Whether she flies private or commercial.
Exactly. So, royal correspondent for The Sun, Emily Andrews, says that when Kate travels, she gets an extra seat on the airplane just for her dresses.
I love this.
It's so cool. So she hangs her dresses on the back of the seat so they don't get wrinkled. And it sounds like this happens when they take regular flights and, when they take private jets, it's not an issue. But
That's so
an
cool.
extra seat just for your garments.
For your garment bag.
Oh my gosh, that's so cool. And so she said this in a new documentary called Secrets of the Royal Flight, and it's aired over in the United Kingdom. I haven't been able to find it online yet, but if anyone knows how we can watch it, we would love to see it.
I would love to see that. It kind of makes sense. How many seats? So they have the 3 kids. There's each of them, Prince William and Kate, and then at least 1 or 2 assistants.
Yeah, probably.
How many seats do you think they buy when they travel? One for the...
So there's 5 for the family. Let's say they bring 1 assistant, so that's 6. And then they've got royal protection officers. Let's say they have 2 of those.
There you go.
So that would be 8.
And then the dresses.
And the dress is 9.
So are you like buying out first class? Is that what you're basically
How
doing?
many seats are in first class?
I don't know. I think it depends on the plane. Right?
Okay.
But it sounds like it.
Yeah, that's quite a few seats.
That's a great story.
I love that.
I think I'll travel like that next time I fly. What do you think?
Does this include my extra chair for my dresses? They're going to think you're crazy.
Don't sit there. I bought that. It's for the
That's
suitcase.
For my dresses. Yeah, you're on a Southwest flight where you don't even reserve seats.
Somebody's bringing their dog. I'm bringing my dresses. Okay, so we have a little section of news related to our favorite TV series, The Crown. This Helena Bonham Carter story is fantastic. And does it remind you a little of Prince Margaret?
Oh, yes.
Princess Margaret.
Yes.
Who she portrayed in The Crown. Apparently, Helena Bonham Carter once got drunk and tried to convince Prince William to be her daughter's godfather. Do you believe this?
I believe it because it came straight from Helena. So she told Andy Cohen on Watch What Happens Live that she got drunk. She drank enough to not drink anymore, but wasn't totally wasted, I think was she said something like that.
Very relaxed.
She's very relaxed. So she said that she had spent all of her friends on her first child. So her son has 11 godparents.
Oh my God.
Right. That seems excessive. And so when she had her daughter, she realized she didn't have any friends left for godparents, but she figured if she used Prince William, that would make up for the lack
Not
of
having all those people.
Right. And so she was drinking. Prince William was drinking. She didn't say where they were, if it was like a private party or what kind of event they were at. But she said she asked him, and his response was, "You don't want me to be godfather to your child." And so it didn't work out. But I thought that was so funny. Like, she's close enough, or I guess gutsy enough, to ask Prince William to be her child's godfather.
She seems like that kind of person, don't you? That she would have the kind of, I would be terrified. Wouldn't you just be watching what you're saying the whole time?
Yes, absolutely. And 11 godparents
for
her son.
That's crazy.
What do you need all of those for?
Exactly. Great story. Another great story. So then, speaking of Princess Margaret, apparently the Crown only scratches the surface of her children's lives, which we know from watching all 10 episodes now. But I thought it might be interesting just to talk about Princess Margaret's kids, because we learn a lot about her in season 3 of The Crown and her tumultuous marriage to Anthony Armstrong Jones. But after they got married, May 6, 1960, Westminster Abbey, the Queen names Armstrong Jones Earl of Snowdon. They went on to have 2 children. David was born November 3rd, 1961, and a daughter, Sarah, born May 1st, 1964. And they both grew up in Kensington Palace. And David has built a career as a furniture designer and furniture maker. He has his own shop, David Lindley Furniture Limited. And Sarah is also interested in works in the arts. And they both really trace this whole interest in the arts to their father's photography and his career as a photographer. So David is so successful. He's done some furniture pieces for Elton John and Valentino.
Ooh.
That's very impressive. He's married to Serena Armstrong Jones, who's the Countess of Snowdon. And after his dad died, David became the 2nd Earl of Snowdon. So that was a title that transferred down to him.
Oh, cool.
And they have 2 children. And then Lady Sarah is a well-respected painter and vice president of the Royal Ballet. She was also a bridesmaid at the wedding of Prince Charles and Lady Diana.
Oh, that's
Isn't that
so
cool?
cute.
She keeps a pretty low profile, but apparently she's one of the Queen's confidants and also Prince Harry's godmother. So there's more godparent news. And she married actor Daniel Chotto in 1994. They have 2 children. So just a little background on that. Don't you wonder when you're watching The Crown? Obviously, the nanny raised her kids.
Mm-hmm.
Princess Margaret didn't seem like she was really there emotionally for them. I mean, or at least the series didn't make it seem like that.
Right.
She was traveling a lot and concentrating on her relationships, should we say?
That's a good way to put it.
Okay.
Yeah, I love hearing things about these other royals we don't typically hear a whole lot about, because Princess Margaret, she was a senior member of the royal family. You know, she's the sister of the Queen, so she had a very important role throughout many decades, but we don't know a whole lot about her children's lives. That's really nice.
So last but not least in the Crown news, we've talked about this before, but so much more has been done on the royal family's BBC documentary. And obviously you've talked about that this hasn't been seen in public in decades. And there's a really good reason why, because the Queen doesn't want us to see it. But Town and Country did this great article where they talked about this episode basically in The Crown, which is about how this documentary was made. So the Queen's former press secretary, William Heseltine, thought it would be a good idea, and it got full support from Prince Philip. So that seems accurate. We've talked about that before in the episode. The goal was to show the royal family as real people in their homes, which was important at the time because there was this feeling that the public was sort of out of touch with who they were or why they were important anymore. But as the filming went on, Prince Philip became less enthusiastic. In fact, he hated to have the camera on himself. This is all according to Heseltine.
That's really funny because he was kind of the person who pressured everyone, specifically Princess Anne, who didn't want to do this, convinced them, we need to do this, it's a great idea. So he's one of those people who wanted to facilitate it, but didn't want to actually be on camera.
Well, that is funny. And this is where sort of the Crown and the television story, you can compare notes to the real story because of what's here with this interview with Heseltine. So the BBC head of documentaries directed the production. Shooting began June 8th, 1968 at the annual Trooping the Color ceremony. In total, there were 75 days of shooting in 172 different locations. I had no idea.
That's crazy.
And the final edit boiled down to a film of about 2 hours. And apparently there's a lot of outtakes that were never even included in the actual documentary that have never seen the light of day, but have been preserved.
Right.
And what ended up on the cutting room floor,
I wish we could see those.
I know, wouldn't that be great? So it aired on June 21st, 1969 in black and white, a week later on ITV in color, and there were broadcasts around the world and 5 more repeat showings in the UK. And after that, it was really done because the royal family started to get a lot of criticism from people like Sir David Attenborough and others who were like, the royal family needs to be shrouded in mystery. Why are you doing this?
But it was so popular that 68% of the adult British population at the time watched it. Can you imagine 68% of the population watching anything?
Well, remember though, back in the 60s, there was very little programming on TV. There were,
that's true.
Like we're
fewer
so
options, yeah.
Oh my gosh. We're so flooded with channels and programming today, but back then, TV stations went dark. They'd sign off and they'd go off the air because they didn't have anything to show, like in the middle of the night or what have you. So I feel like that number is probably reflective of that, like just the history of broadcasting and sort of where it was at the time. But think about this. So that many people watch it. There's no social media or anything for people to really talk about it in the sense that we do today. But the palace, or at least the Queen, gets the message that this is not a good idea. We've got to get rid of this thing. And in 1970, it's locked in the Royal Archives and it's only ever touched with permission from Her Majesty.
That's wild.
Isn't that pretty crazy?
That is so cool. One of the things from the documentary that made a lot of headlines at the time was that the royals used Tupperware to store their leftover food.
I love that. So, that does make them look human.
Yeah, it makes them look really cool and relatable. But also, like, what else did you think they stored their food in? Maybe they've upgraded to Pyrex by now. Of course they use something like that.
Royals, they're just like us.
Exactly.
Well, and you made this point back when we were talking about the Crown episode that since 1970, only 90 seconds has been released of this documentary, and it was for an exhibition at London's National Portrait Gallery in 2011. This is that clip you talked about on YouTube.
Yeah,
it's the only thing you're ever able to see.
Oh.
Kind of a shame.
Yeah, maybe we'll see it eventually.
We can always hope.
Yeah, I would love to see it. And I loved the image, the still image that Town and Country used in the story. It's of Prince Philip wearing what appears to be pretty nice clothes, but painting a picture. And it just made me laugh because if I'm painting anything, I'm not wearing a nice sweater and, pants. I thought that was funny and adorable.
It is, yeah. And very telling of how they wanted to be seen.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's all the time we have for today. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at Royal Dish Pod. Follow us on Instagram, also at Royal Dish Pod. That one's brand new, so be sure to follow us there. And subscribe to Royal Dish wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.